ensuring that we have the safety infrastructure, planning, and policies in place to protect students in the years to come. The Walk Without Worry Amendment Act of 2021 was introduced by Council members Nadeau, Pinto, Robert White, McDuffie, Allen, Silverman, Gray, Henderson, Bonds, Louis George, Chairman Mendelson, and me on December 16, 2021. This bill would require DDOT to develop design and engineering standards for continuous sidewalks, raised crosswalks, and raised intersections. It would specify the circumstances where these design features must be installed and would incorporate their construction into contracts for paving or resurfacing of streets and sidewalks as part of DDOT's annual paving plan. Together, the bills would standardize a number of important safety features for DDOT to ensure a more comprehensive approach to pedestrian safety, especially for our most vulnerable users, namely our kids. We know that things like raised crosswalks and curb extension protect pedestrians, but we haven't moved fast enough to build this kind of infrastructure, and the result has been growing traffic harms and fatalities and persistent danger to our children. Before we turn to our witnesses, I would like to acknowledge the council members who are here. And I see so far Councilmember Janice Lewis George and Brianne Nadeau. I'm checking to see whether anybody else is here. Hang on one second. Okay, I don't know who came first. Can my staff tell me who was here first? Councilmember Nadeau was here first. So Councilmember Nadeau, I'm going to turn to you now if you have an opening statement, and then Councilmember Lewis George.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I am really grateful to you for calling this hearing. I've been looking forward to it for a while and have had the pleasure of working with you and Councilmember Lewis George on these two important bills that continue to advance the council's response to eliminating traffic violence and fatal crashes. It's been a tragic year on our roads, following tragic years of stalled progress on Vision Zero. My personal observations are that any prior success we've had with bringing down road deaths were loosely held together by social norms that have broken down in real time. When we are clear-eyed about this issue, we have to admit that the only traffic calming the United States has ever accomplished at scale is traffic itself. The way we slow down drivers is with traffic. More drivers. We need to acknowledge how completely insane that is. Once the pandemic changed travel patterns so substantially, we saw how tenuous the state of affairs was. Traffic went down, roads opened up, and as recent studies showed us, the people who continued to drive through 2020 and 2021 were on average those who were already driving more dangerously. I think a lot of us have felt that anecdotally. As DDOT has said, the number of total crashes in DC has gone down compared to 2019, but the crashes that are happening have been significantly more fatal. Our response to people dying in greater numbers shouldn't be, we need the traffic back. We know all the negative externalities of that traffic. We need to rise to this challenge and forge a new future that's more ambitious than any previous plans we've made. I want to talk broadly about our Vision Zero goal, which has often been the foundation of these hearings. As the Walk Without Worry Amendment Act was being drafted, Nina Larson was killed in an unprotected crosswalk in Ward 1. That grief is still palpable in the community. As with many of these deaths, it happened in a place where neighbors and ANC commissioners have long called for better infrastructure that never materialized. I'm reminded all the time of what government can and should be doing to prevent deaths like hers. I have to acknowledge that Ward 1 has fewer fatal crashes than other parts of the district that are much more disadvantaged. The need to save lives is tremendous on streets like Southern Avenue and in neighborhoods across Wards 5, 7, 8. I believe you can find a 12-month period in Ward 1 where we did not have any traffic deaths, likely because Ward 1 has a lot of traffic. If we call that Vision Zero mission accomplished, then I think we're missing something critical. Fatal and injury crashes are events we can count and classify. Near misses, close brushes, outright intimidation from drivers, getting yelled at. These are all basically unclassifiable, but so many residents experience it every day. Not everyone personally knows someone who's been killed in a crash, but I think everyone has experienced a driver buzzing them, sometimes intentionally. So many people have come to me with a legitimate fear that they or their children will be next. While we can count crashes, we can't count what I can only call the daily microaggressions of a hypermasculine car culture. I feel this pain in my constituents, like those who have to pass the crosswalk every day where Nina Larson was killed and continue to experience dangerous speeding, double parking, and a street that is not keeping everyone safe. For every death, there are dozens of injuries, and likely for every injury, there are hundreds of moments that indicate to our residents that their lives are constantly at risk, and to make it more and more challenging to experience our roadways with any sort of confidence, let alone joy. That's why the bill I've introduced is called Walk Without Worry. We are saying not only that we need to end traffic deaths, above and beyond that, we need to strongly communicate our priorities in physical space. We should be giving drivers no choice but to slow down, not asking nicely, and be designing our public realm to prioritize pedestrians, particularly children and those with adaptive mobility needs. The power of something like a continuous sidewalk is that in addition to slowing traffic, it very clearly signals that a driver is entering pedestrian space rather than vice versa. For the United States, this is a revolutionary concept, but it doesn't have to be. The core conceit of Walk Without Worry is to deeply incorporate the most effective safety interventions into DDOT's standard practice by adhering closely to the agency's pre-existing systems. We can't get good at something unless we are intentional about doing it and making it a practice. It's been amazing to see the broad support from residents and ANCs on this bill, which would make the installation of continuous sidewalks and raised crosswalks and intersections standard practice across the district. I agree with one common piece of feedback we've gotten, which is that the bill should include sometimes some kind of prioritization for installing these elements where they are most needed and to make that rollout more equitable. I also suspect that the executive will testify in disagreement with doing this work through the paving plan. I'm willing to negotiate on that, but only with the agreement that our goal is to still make something like a raised intersection unexceptional, an integral part of how we build our streets rather than something neighborhoods need to pay for. Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, a continuous sidewalk matches the material of a sidewalk where a raised crosswalk continues to the appearance of a traditional crosswalk. I'm going to wrap it up because it's gotten quite long, and I thank you for your support in hearing these measures.
Thank you very much. And next we have Councilmember Louis George for an opening statement, if you have one.
Thank you, Chairwoman Che, and to you and your staff for the work and for bringing both of these legislations before us today. And thank you to our witnesses for making time to speak with us today. I'm grateful for your leadership and the speed with which you and your staff have helped get this hearing together today. I was proud to introduce the Safe Routes to School Expansion Regulation Amendment Act of 2021 with the support of all 12 of my colleagues this past December. The bill proposes many new requirements for DDOT meant to build a proactive safety net around all of our public schools, both DCPS and charter, so that we can safeguard our students and their families as they commute to and from school. I started working on this bill shortly after the tragic death of Zaire Joshua in Ward 4 last year. Zaire was hit and killed while crossing Kennedy Street at Georgia Avenue Northwest. Although this intersection is not directly adjacent to a school, it's within a quarter mile of Zaire's school, Truesdale Elementary School, and Georgia Avenue is known as the most dangerous corridor. I had Timothy Abbott within my heart and my mind, as he also lost his life at an intersection near Tacoma Education Campus. My work on this bill continued through the summer as we toured every Ward 4 DC public school before the return to in-person learning for all students last fall. It became painfully clear to me how different the roads and sidewalks are around each of our schools, even just in Ward 4. Not everyone has school zone signs. Most don't have raised crosswalks or curb extensions to help encourage slow driving, and several lack sufficient crossing guards. We have inequitable access to safe streets in our communities. My office met with several traffic safety advocates, parents, school administrators, members of the State Board of Education, and others to identify what could be done. What we heard over and over is a sense of frustration that DDOT could be doing this already, but just hasn't prioritized this work. They already have an amazing Safe Routes to School team, which looks at a handful of schools each year and evaluates ways to make their school zones and quarter-mile walk sheds safer for students who walk and bike to school. But what happens to those reports? Often they just sit on the shelf and nothing happens. And there's no comprehensive plan to make all of our schools safe from traffic violence. That's what this bill aims to achieve, a plan to get us towards safety proactively. This bill sets out specific requirements for traffic safety infrastructure that must be installed near our schools. It requires raised crosswalks and curb extensions at every intersection adjacent to a school. It requires additional signage and flashing beacons so drivers know when they're near schools. It requires speed humps or speed tables in front of school entrances. It standardizes and grows school zones to be 150 yards surrounding each school and sets the 15-mile-per-hour speed limit as effective 24/7. It requires DDOT to create a safe routes to school action plan to ensure every public schools gets these treatments, DCPS and charter, starting with the schools most in need of our help now. It does all this to proactively promote road safety around our schools. We can no longer tolerate DDOT waiting until children get hit before action's taken. That's exactly what happened last month at Truesdale Elementary School, where Principal Foster and members of the Brightwood Park community have been begging for traffic calming and safety improvements for years. But it wasn't until a little child was hit during morning drop-off and that we saw speed humps that have now come in. But that's unacceptable. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Policy is a love language. This is how I choose to show my love for these children in our communities. When Allison Hart's mom testified during last month's performance oversight hearing for DDOT, I told her we wanted to do something that she could be proud of. Caden Green in Ward 8 and Pete Desikin in Ward 7 were also struck by drivers. Luckily, not fatally, but both were hit within an hour of leaving school. We know traffic violence is a major threat to the safety of our communities, and we've got to do more to ensure safer streets for everyone. I am eager to hear from the community members today on ways we can improve or strengthen the legislation. And my questions today to DDOT will focus on my bill and points I'd like to clarify and improve before working with Chairwoman Che and the committee on marking it up. I was also proud to co-introduce Councilmember Nadeau's Walk Without Worry Act, the other bill up for discussion today. And I believe together with the Safe Routes to School bill, we can maintain momentum towards passage and funding this essential work in next year's budget to ensure that our students are safe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Council Member. There being no other council members present that I can see, we're now going to turn to our witnesses, and the usual rules will apply here, which is to say we're going to hear our public witnesses first and then our government witnesses thereafter. Public witnesses will have 3 minutes to present their testimony, and those who represent organizations will have 5 minutes. If there are 2 people from the same organization, then one will have 5 and one will have 3. And then we have a system here where some sort of bell or something rings when you're over your time. So if you listen for that, and also the time is kept in the chat. So if you want to check on yourself, and we would ask that you please keep to the time allotted. So I want to start by calling the witnesses that we have. And I'm going to start with Zachary Israel of ANC 4D04, Rachel Maisler of the Bicycle Advisory Council, Sophie Elliott, a public witness, Ben Schulman, a public witness, J.I. Swiderski, DC Pedestrian Advisory Council, Emily Thomas DeWolf, the Lincoln Road Project, and Travis Swanson of ANC 7B03. So I'm going to give a moment here for folks to move in. I understand Commissioner Swanson is not here, so I'm going to add another person, Farrah Fossey, a public witness. Okay, I think we're ready to go with this panel. So we're going to start with Commissioner Israel.
Thank you, Chair Che and members of the Committee on Transportation and the Environment. Thank you for holding this critically important public hearing today regarding the Safe Routes to School Expansion Regulation Amendment Act of 2021 and the Walk Without Worry Amendment Act of 2021. My name is Zach Israel, and I represent Single Member District 4D04, which includes parts of Petworth and Brightwood Park in Ward 4. I am testifying today in my individual capacity as a commissioner and not on behalf of ANC 4D. However, ANC 4D will very likely adopt a resolution later this week at our March public meeting, which includes our commission's official support for both of these bills, in addition to other safe streets related legislation introduced by you, Chair Che, and Ward 1 Councilmember Nadeau last month. Vision Zero has been an abject failure in the District of Columbia. In 2015, Mayor Bowser committed the district to achieving a Vision Zero pledge to eliminate transportation fatalities and serious injuries by the year 2024 through the implementation of strategies related to data, education, engineering, and enforcement. However, 40 people were killed by traffic violence in 2021, making 2021 the deadliest year on the district's roads since 2007. Half of those killed by traffic violence in 2021 were not in a vehicle, with 17 pedestrians being hit and killed and 3 on bikes. Among the 40 lives lost in 2021 were 4-year-old Zaire Joshua, a Truesdale Elementary School student who was killed by a driver near the intersection of Kennedy Street Northwest and Georgia Avenue Northwest within ANC 4D on April 1st, 2021. Traffic violence near DC schools is of great concern. In 2021 and 2022 to date, there were several instances where drivers hit and injured young students on their way to and from school. This includes an incident in which a driver hit their car into a child directly outside the front entrance to Truesdale Elementary on February 14th, 2022, Valentine's Day, as he was walking across the 800 block of Ingraham Street Northwest at the beginning of the school day. Truesdale Elementary is located within my single-member district, and the safety of the school's 450 students and their families is of the utmost concern to me. If DDOT is unwilling to implement procedures, policies, and practices to keep district residents and students safe, then the council must pass these 2 bills to require DDOT to take actions that will save lives. The Safe Routes to School bill will make the physical infrastructure surrounding all of our public schools significantly safer by requiring a traffic signal or always stop at every local intersection within a quarter mile of the school, and mandating raised crosswalks and curb extensions at every intersection adjacent to a school, as well as crosswalk warning pylons, flashing pedestrian signs, and speed humps near school entrances. If these measures were already in place prior to February of this year, it's very likely that that Truesdale student would not have been hit by a driver. While Bill 24-565 contains really great policy, it could be made stronger. This includes requiring annual state of good repair audits, expanding the covered entities to include private schools, shortening the time frame for signage installation, surveying the school communities for desired traffic safety improvements, and requiring planning for the Act's expansion to other public facilities providing services to children, including but not limited to recreation centers, child development centers, i.e. daycares, public libraries, playgrounds, public parks, and splash parks. The Walk Without Worry Amendment Act will standardize the use of continuous sidewalks, raise crosswalks, and raise intersections, and require DDOT to incorporate them in all new paving or roadway resurfacing projects. This will ensure that DDOT is significantly more proactive with regard to keeping district residents safe instead of the constant stream of reactiveness that is far too commonplace. If Bill 24-566 were enacted, there are 12 intersections in my single-member district alone which would be eligible for continuous sidewalks, 13 intersections which would be eligible for raised crosswalks, and 5 intersections which would be eligible to be raised entirely, all of which surround Truesdale Elementary. While Bill 24-566 contains really great policy as well, it could also be made stronger. This includes allowing for additional traffic calming infrastructure to be implemented by DDOT, ensuring equity in implementation, and providing mechanisms to accelerate the installation of traffic calming and sidewalk improvement measures. I am very encouraged by the fact that all 13 council members support Councilmember Lewis George's bill, and 12 of the 13 council members support Councilmember Nadeau's bill. These overwhelming majorities reveal the desire by our legislature to take real transformational action to ensure the district streets are as safe as possible for our students and residents. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Commissioner. Next is Rachel Maisler of the Bicycle Advisory Council.
Hi, how are you guys today? Thank you. Like you said, I'm Rachel Maisler, Chair of the Bicycle Advisory Council. I'm testifying on behalf of the BAC today. 6 months and 1 day ago, many of us on this call heard the news we've been fighting so hard to prevent. A 5-year-old on her bike in a crosswalk, nonetheless, next to a school, had been killed by a driver. Sadly, this wasn't the first or the only time a young child had been killed by a driver in a crosswalk last year. Months earlier, 4-year-old Zaire Joshua was killed by a driver while on foot. And here we are again. We're here again because the mayor and DDOT are not acting with enough urgency to implement infrastructure and policies that could have prevented these crashes. So again, it's the council to the rescue. Thank you, Councilmember Lewis George. Thank you, Councilmember Nadeau. Thank you, Councilmember Che. The fact of the matter is we need the Safe Routes to School Expansion Regulation Act of 2021. We need the Walk Without Worry Amendment Act of 2021. We need the Safe Streets legislation that you, Councilmember Che, introduced last month. We need it. We need, and we'll talk about yours later, but we need it passed, and we need it passed now, and we need it funded. So now let me tell you some of the reasons why the BAC supports these two pieces of legislation that are on today's docket. First, Safe Routes to School. All of the traffic calming features would make it safer for parents to bike or walk their kids to school. One of the reasons I hear from parents that they don't walk or bike their kids to school is because they fear other drivers. So these parents drive their kids to school and in an effort to keep their own kids safe, become part of the problem. It's a vicious cycle that is preventable, and this legislation aims to change that. Data. As I've said time and again, and the BAC has said time and again, we're only going to lower the number of fatalities and crashes if we lower the number of potential conflicts. And that means getting drivers off the road. The BAC loves the data collection piece of this bill, but what do we do with the data that's collected? The BAC recommends adding an incentive program to encourage more parents to walk, bike, take public transit, whatever, to get their kids to school that's not in a private vehicle. We're happy to discuss this further. With regard to Walk Without Worry, the BAC supports this bill and is happy to discuss implementation at any time. We understand that the bill may not pass exactly as written because DDOT and the council need to fine-tune the details, but the BAC, and I'm sure the PAC and the MAC, will look forward to contributing to those conversations. So with that, I'm keeping it short because we were just here last month. Please don't wait. Please pass these bills. Please fund these bills, and please make our streets safe. I don't want to have to plan another memorial for a kid or anybody who's killed by a driver in DC. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Sophie Elliott, a public witness.
Hi there. My name is Sophie Elliott. I'm a DC resident, currently living in Mount Pleasant. Thank you to the council for allowing me to speak today. In her introduction, Councilmember Nadeau spoke to the impact of instances of traffic violence that are harder to account for, and I'd like to share my experience about this. 4.5 years ago, 2 weeks before my 21st birthday, I was hit by a car while biking to the middle school I tutored at every Monday morning. My head hit the windshield so hard that the windshield wipers turned on, and then I flew halfway across the street and rolled for a little bit. I broke my right knee, my face, and had deep tissue bruising in the entire right side of my body. I had emergency surgery a few hours later, and my knee is now mostly metal. I couldn't lift my arm or chew for 6 weeks. The physical effects were brutal, and I still deal with them daily. I'm 25 now, and I'll likely have my third knee surgery this year. I'm staring down a life of chronic pain, regular migraines, and early onset arthritis. I can no longer run, and I don't bike anymore. But the mental and emotional toll of getting hit by a car like that is incomparable. I'm only just getting the hang of managing debilitating PTSD that's triggered constantly by unpunished reckless driving in DC. When we talk about traffic violence, we usually talk about fatalities, and we should. No question, that is a tragedy that no person should ever have to face. But the number of people whose daily lives are forever changed by living through an experience like mine is astronomical and uncounted. Because of this experience, I'm constantly paying extremely close attention to cars, bikes, and pedestrians while I'm walking outside or crossing a street. Each close call that I experience or even witness is incredibly re-traumatizing, and they happen with an alarming degree of frequency. I have too many friends here in DC who have been clipped or hit by cars that were flying down a side street, making a reckless right on red, speeding up to make it through a yellow, or plowing through a stop sign. The ultimate goal needs to be to eliminate incidents altogether. In the meantime, though, we need to take steps immediately to reduce the chances of lethality. The car that hit me was turning left out of a parking lot on my college campus, and it couldn't have been going more than 10 or 15 miles an hour. I wish every single day that I had stayed home that morning, but the tragic reality is that I will never forget is that I'm one of the lucky ones. If I had faced a similar situation here in DC, I believe that I simply wouldn't be here because there wouldn't have been a stop sign or a speed bump, and the car would have been going faster than 15. Instead of keeping us safe, our city's infrastructure prioritizes cars and people die. The policies in these two bills would have lessened the severity of my accident or possibly prevented it altogether. I hold my breath when I cross the street now because frankly, I know that my safety does not take precedence in the eyes of drivers or of the city. and it's well past time for that to change. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next is Ben Schulman, a public witness.
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you for providing this hearing. It's difficult for many of us to watch car makers churn out heavier, more dangerous vehicles, and then watch those vehicles inevitably cause injury and death for bikers and pedestrians. I think many of us feel helpless when the grills of new pickup trucks reach 6 feet in height, and we wonder how such a car could strike anybody without serious consequences. Our status quo in the US often places the burden of street safety on children. Children are not known for studying urban design after recess. The status quo also puts 150-pound people against 5,000-pound machines with no infrastructure to slow the machines. And as has already been heartbreakingly shared on this call, people lose those matchups every time. I applaud the DC Council and particularly the members on this call for understanding the insanity of this status quo and putting forward these bills to change it. Rather than simply trusting drivers to keep us safe and sending thoughts and prayers when they fail to, the Safe Routes to School Expansion and Walk Without Worry Acts provide reasonable, helpful solutions. Make no mistake that the infrastructure changes stemming from these bills will mean fewer of us on crutches, in hospital beds, and at funerals. In addition to these bills, I encourage the Council to continue examining the high costs of car dominance and continue proposing solutions to meaningfully decrease it in DC. There's much work to do on this front, and I agree with many of the additional considerations raised by Commissioner Israel, but these bills are an important step in the right direction. I yield my time.
Thank you very much. Next is J.I. Swiderski of the DC Pedestrian Advisory Council.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
The Pedestrian Advisory Council was created by DC law in 2009 to advise the mayor, council, and district agencies on how to improve pedestrian safety and accessibility. I am Jay Swiderski, and I represent Ward 1 on the PAC. As we have said several times, effective implementation of Vision Zero requires a fundamental systemic paradigm shift away from the traditional engineering standards that have ruled our lives for decades. Creating standard plans for traffic calming road designs and implementing them systematically citywide, as these bills would do, would be one such fundamental systemic shift, and the PAC welcomes it. So while these bills could be improved in several ways, which I will address, I want to say first and foremost that the Pedestrian Advisory Council supports these bills and urges that they be passed quickly, funded completely, and implemented quickly and completely. Although police press releases and the coverage that follows them are all too quick to note when a person who was struck was not in a crosswalk, crosswalks are not magic. Paint is not protection, as we say of bike lanes. Several of the 17 pedestrians killed on DC roads last year, including Nina Larson here in Adams Morgan, and even 2 of those killed while on their bikes, Armando Martinez Ramos and 5-year-old Allison Hart, were in crosswalks with the right-of-way when they were struck by drivers, as were many who survived, like 4-year-old Nathan Ballard Means, hit not 500 yards from where I sit. Crosswalks are not magic, so we need more to protect people from reckless drivers. And in several of the places where people were killed last year, DDOT has begun to make changes. But too often, we see changes made only to specific locations where incidents have already occurred. These bills would require improvements where Nina, Armando, and Ali were killed, and at similar locations across the district. Of course, no bill is perfect as introduced, so we have a few improvements we'd like to see, and things will be following up on as these bills are funded and implemented. Tying the changes required to make our streets safer to our annual paving plan may make it easier to fund and implement them, but we worry it may also concentrate changes in particularly vocal and well-resourced areas of the district, which we already know are more likely to get repaved more frequently. Conversely, while the Walk Without Worry Act allows DDOT to enumerate any locations where traffic calming is inappropriate or not feasible and name alternative measures, it does not put boundaries on what makes a location inappropriate or not feasible. Since the entire point is to make dangerous roads safer to cross, for example, it should not be allowable to deny calming measures due to level of service or traffic counts or failure to meet the warrants. Indeed, if anything, high count free-flowing traffic makes a street more dangerous for everyone not in a car and should move it up the list, not off it. The text also does not provide an opportunity for residents to challenge the department's assessment or propose alternatives. A balance must be found which results in more rather than less traffic calming, particularly in those same under-resourced, less frequently paved neighborhoods which have suffered under decades of changes to make them more car-oriented, and where the majority of DC's traffic fatalities occur, even as half or more of their residents do not own vehicles. Walk Without Worry also calls for raised intersections where there is substantial pedestrian activity and adjacent to metro rail and school facilities, but does not define what constitutes substantial or adjacent. It is too easy to think of potential loopholes and exceptions, so these terms should be defined. While the improvements mandated by these bills in areas around public and charter schools are important, other areas that are also frequented by children should be included as well, such as libraries, playgrounds, and recreation centers. Private schools, daycares, senior centers, and care homes should also be able to at least request to be included. Finally, as the PAC has noted repeatedly, DDOT's process for identifying and repairing problems on our sidewalks is both inequitable and insufficient. It often requires repeated personal contacts by ANC commissioners and advisory council members to department heads to get crosswalks repainted, and sidewalk work often violates safe accommodations requirements. Council should include a requirement for ongoing inspection and maintenance, and include performance metrics, such as mandating a number or proportion of eligible locations be included each year. The PAC continues to believe that unless we as a city are ready to change how we view and use our streets, we will not eliminate traffic deaths and serious injuries. We live in a city and our streets must be designed to protect everyone using them, including those who are unable to drive and those who have chosen not to, even if this means that people driving will not be able to travel as quickly or conveniently as they might like. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And next is Emily Thomas DeWolf of the Lincoln Road Project.
Yes, hello, good morning, and thank you for holding this hearing.
Good afternoon, actually.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and provide some testimony. My name's Emily Thomas, and I work on the Lincoln Road Project, which I started with a group of my neighbors to try and get some pedestrian safety in Ward 5. I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, and we live in Ward 5, and my daughter attends our neighborhood elementary school, and I walk her to school every day, and I can't wait to send my son there next year. I must say, though, my family's biggest worry and that of many of our neighbors is keeping our kids safe while we're walking them to and from schools and rec centers, to visit friends and restaurants and all of the wonderful things that we love to do. We know that traffic violence is a growing problem, but it's also a fixable problem. But it's not fixable with the same inaction that we continue to see from DDOT. And so this act is a really important step in the right direction. You've heard from others, and you're going to continue to hear from all of us about how important it is to improve the safety of our roads. And this is for pedestrians and cyclists and drivers. We have a lot of stretches of road in this city and too many intersections that are really dangerous for all of us. And we really need to make them safer. And that's so much more critical for our young students as they're walking to school. In our neighborhood, we have a really good example of what we see all over DC. We have a road classified as a minor arterial, and it runs through 2 densely populated residential neighborhoods. We've been pleading with DDOT in the community, and neighbors have been pleading for decades to make this road safer. Reckless drivers cut through and use it. They fly around, they're crashing weekly, and they make the corridor really unsafe for our kids as they're walking to school. There are 5 schools on or adjacent to this road. We've got rec centers, playgrounds, and a pool. And yet DDOT has refused to act, and they've refused to meaningfully engage the community on making changes to this road. And DDOT is prioritizing moving cars quickly through residential neighborhoods. And they really don't have the regard for safety of the folks who walk around here. And this isn't unique to Ward 5. The same story plays out over and over. And in our neighborhood, a group of parents and neighbors have recently made a really big push with tons of community support. And we've asked for a lot of the things that this act is supporting. We've asked for the, always stops and raised crosswalks. radar speed displays, daylighting, and all of those typical things. And after months and months and months and months working with DDOT, the only thing they've done is add a few more seconds to a crosswalk that's near 4 schools. On a corner where there are 4 schools on that block, they've only added 4 seconds to a crosswalk to give kids more time to get across the street. Behind me, you can see the result of traffic violence in our neighborhood, all these pictures of crashes. And you can also see pictures of 2 young students. These are my young students, and they're not currently being prioritized by DDOT. And this is just meant to be a reminder of the high cost of inaction. Just last week in our neighborhood, a student was hit by a vehicle while she was walking to school along this very road with her siblings. Her injuries were minor, thank goodness, and they were treatable at Children's Hospital. But it's such a trauma on her and her family and the community, and it's really an unacceptable burden to place on students. The bottom line here is that our roads are designed in an unsafe way, and that's a DDOT problem, or it should be a DDOT problem. But DDOT's continued inaction and unwillingness to prioritize student safety means that this has become a student and a community problem. So we'd like to see increased consistency to the process that we have to use to request safety. Right now, there are only 3 paths. One is you have a ton of extra time on your hands, or you're a connected member of the community, so you can do all of the administrative stuff needed to get an enhancement. Second is somebody needs to die at a place where a safety fix is needed. Or third, a council member needs to get directly involved. That's a huge equity issue, and it's not acceptable. All communities need to have equal access to requesting and getting safety fixes that they need, especially near schools like we've talked about. So we want to see all of the things in this act prioritized and more. We'd like to see more speed bumps. We'd like to see these things in residential neighborhoods. We'd like to see the time reduced that it takes for these safety fixes to get implemented. And one other thing that we've heard from the community is that the community has lost a lot of faith in this process. There have been people, my neighbors, that have been requesting this for decades, and their requests have gone unanswered. And it would be great if DDOT could in some way restore that trust by going back and maybe looking at requests that residents have been submitting in areas and maybe revisit those, because there are families, people that have been living here for generations that have been asking for these things and haven't seen any results. So thank you for hearing my testimony and for proposing this act. I think it's a great start to getting the community safer. I'd like to see it passed and fully funded. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I understand that Commissioner Travis Swanson has appeared in some way, but is not listed as a panelist. Can I?
I'm here, Councilmember Shea.
Where are you? Okay, well then there you are. I was just going to try to resolve that. So you can go ahead, Commissioner, and give us your testimony.
Great, thank you. I want to start off by saying thank you to Council Members Lewis, George, and Nadeau for bringing these important bills forward, and to Councilmember Shea for holding today's hearing. My name is Travis Swanson, and I'm the commissioner who has the honor and privilege of representing ANC 7B03, which includes parts of the DuPont Park, Fairlawn, Randall Highland, and Twining neighborhoods in Ward 7. I'm here today to express my strong support for both the Safe Routes to School Expansion Regulation Amendment Act and the Walk Without Worry Amendment Act. While pedestrian deaths in our city know no political boundaries and happen in all 8 wards, it's no secret that these tragedies are disproportionately impacting Ward 7 and Ward 8. According to data I obtained from the DC dashboard, between January 1st, 2017 and December 31st, 2021, approximately 3,900 pedestrians were struck by vehicles in the district. 445 of these pedestrians sustained major injuries, and 64 of them tragically lost their lives. Of the pedestrian crashes during this period, 1,000 of them happened in Ward 7 and 8, including 190 who sustained major injuries and 25 who lost their lives. Based on this data, it means that despite Ward 7 and Ward 8 accounting for less than 25% of DC's total population, these wards accounted for 35% of pedestrian crashes where the person hit had major injuries, and 39% of all pedestrian deaths in the city. People across the city are literally being killed, and to date, little has been done to prevent future deaths. In ANC 7B, we have several major and minor arterial roads, including Pennsylvania Avenue, Minnesota Avenue, Alabama Avenue, Massachusetts Avenue, Naylor Road, and Good Hope Road, to name a few. Many of these arterials experience speeding cars, particularly but not exclusively driven by drivers who are commuting to and from Maryland for work. And there seems to be very little regard from the drivers for the people who call these neighborhoods home. In ANC 7B03, there is a stretch of Minnesota Avenue between Pennsylvania Avenue and Nelson Place that is just shy of a third of a mile long with no stoplights, which enables cars to go very fast, sometimes over 50 miles an hour in a 30-mile-an-hour street. The crosswalks are often ignored by many drivers, and when a car does finally stop for a pedestrian, the speeding cars often move into the parking lane to pass the stopped car, which can have deadly consequences. On June 23, 2016, Gerald Robert Elliott, a 23-year-old on a bike, was struck and killed on the stretch of Minnesota Avenue near the intersection of Burn Street. And while I believe that the Safe Routes to School Act and the Walk Without Worry Act would provide DDOT with tools needed to help prevent future pedestrian deaths, I do think the Walk Without Worry Amendment Act could be made even stronger by going beyond the current language to require that all rapid flashing beacons in the city, the yellow when the light where the pedestrian pushes the button and the yellow light starts flashing, be replaced with hawk lights, the light where the pedestrian pushes the button and the light turns red. I also think the language should go beyond to say that hawk lights should be required to be installed on all freeway on and off ramps where pedestrian crossings are not otherwise controlled by a standard traffic light. This is particularly important for ANC 7B03 because the interchange of 295 and Penn Ave is not controlled by lights. And as a pedestrian, I have stood there some mornings and counted, crossing one of the 5 unsignaled crosswalks, counting cars, and sometimes I've counted more than 20 passing by me before one of them finally yields the right of way. Additionally, I believe the language of this bill should go beyond the current language to prohibit vehicles from turning right on red at all intersections. Lastly, I just want to close by letting the committee know that in January of 2022, ANC 7B unanimously voted for a resolution supporting the passage of the Safe Routes to School Expansion Regulation Amendment Act. And on February 17, 2022, unanimously voted for a resolution calling for the passage of the Walk Without Worry Amendment Act. And this resolution did include the additional provisions I just mentioned regarding the hawk light and right on red. These resolutions not only had unanimous support from the commissioners, but also had the support of the 7B community who praised the passage of our resolutions. Thank you again for your time, and I hope you will swiftly pass and fund these important bills. And I welcome any questions from the committee members.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And next is Farah Fossey, a public witness.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Farah Fossey. My name is Farah Fossey. I'm a Ward 4 resident and a parent of 2 small children. Sorry. Okay, thank you. I'm here today to testify for both of these bills. Second, I'm going to take some breaths. I fully support all of these traffic calming and safety measures proposed in both of the bills. Most weekdays, I drive or sometimes I bike across Ward 4 with my 2 little kids to Brookland, to my son's school. Can you hear my baby clapping for me? Every morning I worry that I or another driver is going to hit someone, a child. Last year, Zaire Joshua, just a little younger than my own child, was killed just 8 blocks from sorry. So starting this commute, I'm worried about that. And then the second week of my son's 3rd week of kindergarten this year, his classmate Albert was killed while riding her bike in a crosswalk, as we've heard. And so I'm just really here with her family and Zaire's family in my heart, and really thinking about these other children who have been hit by cars, including Caden Green, who is paralyzed after leaving his school. Improving traffic safety near schools is needed and an obvious start to keeping pedestrians, particularly kids, safe. The measures proposed: always stop signs, raised crosswalk, curb extensions, warning pylons, the lights and speed humps will ensure the drivers are doing what they already should be doing, being slow and cautious when they're where children are walking and playing. The measures, as well as the designated pickup and drop-off zones, will ensure the drivers are able to stay in their lanes and cars don't park in crosswalks. Nearly every day in front of McFarland Middle School and Center City PCS, I see cars parked in front of the schools. Drop-offs then take place in the lane, and then cars go around them into the oncoming traffic in order to actually be able to drive on the street. Every day at McFarland, there are people parked in the crosswalks to drop off their children. Just this morning, there were 2 cars parked there. Another car went around them in front of me, the car in front of me, and nearly hit a child who had just gotten out of a car. This is happening every day at these schools. These are important fixes, but many of them can and should happen now, just having more enforcement, more accountability at these intersections. I want to note that I see a real difference that crossing guards make. I regularly pass 12 schools on my different routes. 3 of them, as well as my son's school, Mundo Verde, do have crossing guards, and it makes a huge difference. When I drive past, Mundo and Yu Yang both there. When I drive past, I can see the difference when those crossing guards aren't there. I also just want to weigh in on my support of making the school zones permanent. My kids and I are regularly at school zones outside of school hours using the playgrounds and the fields. For the Walk Without Worry Amendment Act, I want to support these improvements, continuous sidewalks, raised crosswalks, and intersections. I live at Decatur, Iowa, and Arkansas. I have to cross Arkansas really to go almost anywhere in the neighborhood. And it's very busy.
Can I interrupt you? You may have heard that bell. Your time is up. If you'd want to just conclude. Okay.
Yeah,
okay, thank you. That concludes the testimony from this panel. I have a couple of observations I'd like to make. First of all, I want to thank all of the witnesses for testifying, and thank you all who offered recommendations for improvements, which the committee, of course, is going to take into account when we move forward with this bill. I also want to thank Ms. Elliott for her sharing her story with us about how horrific her accident was and the continuing effects of that, because it brings it home, I think, to people better than just speaking theoretically. And then I want to make a couple of observations overall. I think it's time, or past time, that we have a fundamental shift, a paradigm shift in how we think about our roads, away from car-centric approaches and to standard kind of safety plans for our road design. That has to be the way we look at it. We're still operating under road designs that are born of car-centric approaches, with trying to fix things by superimposing changes thereafter. That's not adequate. We have to fundamentally change what we're doing. Second, I really think that even within the confines of what we have now, DDOT can't be just reactive. We have to be proactive and think about what needs to be done right away and not wait for someone to die or be seriously injured. The other thing is that, we really have to make sure that whatever we do is completely equitable across the district. That's fundamentally important as well. And then finally, which has not been mentioned by any of the witnesses here, and I understand why, because of the bills that we're talking about, we can change this, that, or the other thing. Yes, we can enact laws, but unless we have enforcement of those laws, we are kind of wasting our time. And I just remind you again about the people from Maryland and Virginia who come into the District of Columbia and have accrued multiple dangerous driving kinds of tickets and are able to avoid them because we don't have reciprocity on that, and we don't have an active booting and towing system within the district. So we need fundamental change. We need the laws to reflect a road designs that are safety oriented, not just car centric, or not at all car centric. And then whatever we do, we need to have enforcement. So I realize I'm testifying, but I want to thank you all for that, because your testimony underlines what these fundamental changes have to be. So at that, I'd like to turn to Councilmember Lewis George. Councilmember Nadeau again was first. So Councilmember Nadeau, do you have questions for this panel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I mainly just wanted to reflect on the fact that it's so clear from this panel how personal this all is. And what we're doing with these bills is taking what's very personal and making it into good policy, right? And I think it's been said adequately that it's long overdue, but I also appreciate the calls for the standardization of these measures because, you know, government has trouble doing things that are non-standard, right? We have to make it easier for our government to follow the rules, to lay out what we put before them as our political leaders, and show them what the good policy is and how to make that the norm rather than something you have to specially request through a TSI. So I really just want to thank everybody. Your testimony was really poignant to me. And I know I've always got, with two little ones at home, I've always got the babies in mind too. You know, mine are ramblers at this point, right? They're very independent, and they want to walk where they want to walk, and they want to ride their bikes where they want to ride their bikes. And even the quickest one of us, which is not me, it's hard to catch them when they're off on their own and just trying to get where they want to go. So we just have to make the road slower and make the streets safer. So thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry to expound so much, but this is really obviously a very big passion of mine. So thank you to these witnesses.
And thank you, Councilmember. And Councilmember Lewis George, do you have any questions or comments?
Yes. Thank you. One, I want to echo first Councilmember Che on enforcement and the need for enforcement. My grandmother used to say, rules without enforcement are just a wish. And so I echo those concerns. Rachel has a hard stop at 12:55. So Rachel, I'm going to get to you really quickly. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the potential incentive programs to get more people to walk or bike to school. As you know, we've been grappling with that issue. We have a number of teachers who don't have parking spaces at all of our schools, and that's become a very contentious sort of topic. And we're trying to figure out what incentive programs we can have for them. I just wanted to hear if you had any sort of ideas around or have done any research around how we can incentivize more of our teachers, but also our students and parents and administrators to walk or bike to school.
Yeah, so one of the things that always gets me is a couple of years ago, there were a couple, and I'm just speaking fast because I got a jet for another call. Couple crashes at Powell Elementary in Ward 4, and I know you used a picture of that school, where drivers were hitting kids that were getting out of their parents' cars to get to school. So first of all, there's no bike lanes around any of the schools in that whole Powell area, Powell, McFarland, I know Farrah mentioned McFarland, Roosevelt. You've got all sorts of schools, the library. Once you cross Georgia Avenue, there's no more bike lanes until you get to 14th Street. Second of all, there's a lot of sticks in your legislation to try and get people out of your cars, but you catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. So what is that honey? I don't know. I'm not a parent. But what can we do? I'm looking, at Councilmember Nadeau, who's recently started biking her kids around town, or Farrah, who bikes and drives. Sorry, you're the one on the screen, Farrah. But what could we do? Do we need to give the kids tchotchkes? Do we need to give the parents, money, tax credits, books? I don't know what the solution is, but we need to do something positive to get people out of their cars. Because to Councilmember Che's point, we're trying to enforce, but we still have Maryland drivers driving their kids to school, racking up ATE tickets, and nothing that we've done is working so far. And we have a lot of sticks in place, but maybe we need to try a carrot. That's just my point. And something to back discuss. And I can follow up with Will offline about that.
Great. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Rachel. I know you have to go. Thank you for all you do. And we'll follow up with some further questions. Commissioner Israel, I wanted to come to you. We do have some provisions in the legislation right now regarding sort of assessments and traffic safety measures. You did have a good sort of suggestion here about the annual state of good repair audits. Could you just say a little more about what you want to see added in that data collection section, or within the why you want to do the annual state of good repair audit?
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember. That's a great question. So, my preference would be to have those on an annual basis rather than a one-time audit. And to give you an example as to why I think that would be necessary, let's take Truesdale as an example. As you know, it's going to be modernized over the next couple of years. And, that new modernized facility, while, the streets immediately adjacent to Truesdale may not change, some of the patterns of people getting to and from there may change. There may be slightly more kids coming and their families, et cetera. And so I think it would be really important as things change in a particular school environment to ensure that DDOT is just checking that out on a more regular basis, rather than just check it once and then be done with it.
Okay, great. And then want to ask you as well, we sort of have this come up a lot, managing sort of safety and then community feedback. So we're talking about our pickup drop-off zones, and I think Farah was talking about this specifically, what my team calls PUDOs, pickup drop-off zones. How do we, because when we've been talking about, one thing we were talking about was like eliminating the parking on the street, but there's still going to be that pickup drop-off zone issue and parents wanting to do that. We've talked a little bit about maybe making all of those one-way streets, pickup drop-off zones, one-way streets. But then I think we get some pushback sometimes from community members regarding the parking on the street and a number of other things. So just want to hear, I mean, and Farah, this can come to you, Emily, Commissioner Swanson, sort of, what do we do to sort of balance sort of the community input piece with the enforcement piece, with the parking spaces piece, and what are some ideas you all have around that? One thing that we've been talking about is whether some schools can actually create, I don't know, what do you call those? There's pickup drop-off zones that schools create within their school. So you can just like they create, instead of it just being at the sidewalk, we pave an actual way for there to be a pickup drop-off zone. I'm not sure if that would be the fix, but just want to here's something on that piece.
I do think, I mean, my son's school does have that kind of roundabout. You drive around the school and it helps. So I do think there's like having an actual team at the school who's meeting with people who know about this to really, I think they could come up with a plan with parents, with administrators to make it safer. Because there are some ways to do that. I agree with getting rid of the parking, and at schools in my neighborhood, I would be happy to go and talk to people about why it's important and do that neighbor to neighbor work.
Okay.
I think a lot of it could be unpopular, right? Getting rid of parking spaces is traditionally not very popular, but I think that is the push that we need. It needs to be a big push, and then it needs to become standard so that then it's like, well, if you live within X proximity to a school, the street is going to be one way. There are going to be multiple speed bumps. There's going to be no turn on reds. There's going to be always stops, and there's going to be no parking. The kids need to be safe. The community needs to be safe. This is standard, and this is what we're doing. And I think that has to be a big push from council, right? Okay. I can't get that at my kid's school by myself, right? We can't do it at one school. It has to be something that it's every school, and this is what we do, and that's period. And we know that it's unpopular sometimes, but it's a necessity.
Thank you.
And Councilmember, if I can just add to taking Truesdale again as an example, I know parking is always contentious, and any changes residents, some of them get very upset by it, but I really do believe, like the previous witness just said, if we engage the residents who live on the 800 block of Ingraham Street, you'd be surprised by how many of them are willing to sacrifice parking to protect kids. I know that firsthand. I've talked to them, so having those one-on-one conversations will be very impactful.
Yeah. Okay. Absolutely. Well, thank you. I think my time is up. And Emily, I wanted to say we used Lincoln Rose as a street to try and make safer when drafting this bill, and we went over there. Just wanted to note that. And Commissioner Swanson, I just wanted to say we did add sort of a piece in there of how they prioritize this, and that was in thinking that Ward 7 and Ward 8 has traditionally been behind and left behind sort of on traffic safety improvements, and that is sort of a nod to the fact that who has the loudest voices and who has the time, and the advocacy time can't be the reason why things happen. And so we did try to add an equity portion to that to acknowledge that it can't be just the loudest voices or those who have the time to organize. And so appreciate you and the commission for passing support of these legislations. Thank you.
And we appreciate your thought of putting that equity portion in, and appreciate you bringing this forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. And again, thank you to all the witnesses. I'm going to now call in our next panel. Next panel is Farah Ahmed, Truesdale Family Teacher Organization. Next is Shannon Hodge, Founding Executive Director of DC Charter School Alliance. Then Brianna McGowan, Delicious Democracy. That sounds good. Next is Dr. William Dietz of the Redstone Global Center for Prevention and Wellness at George Washington University. Anthony Lorenzo Green, Commissioner Green of ANC 7C04. Benjamin Bergman of ANC 3D, Commissioner Bergman. Josh Rising, the Ward 3 Bicycle Advocates. I assume that's different from the Bicycle Advisory Council. Kristen Scotchmer, Executive Director of Mundo Verde Bilingual Public Charter School. And then we have, I think we'll stop there with that as a group. If anybody's not here, I need to check. Aha, okay, we do have some absences. So I'm going to add two more. Bailey Voigt, public witness, and Lyle Blanchard, a public witness. So starting first with Shannon Hodge, the founding executive director of DC Charter School Alliance.
Good afternoon, Chairperson Che and members of the committee. My name is Shannon Hodge, and I'm the founding executive director of the DC Charter School Alliance, the local nonprofit that advocates on behalf of public charter schools to ensure that every student can choose high-quality public schools that prepare them for lifelong success. On behalf of the DC Charter School community, I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak with you about the proposal before you today to improve traffic safety around schools. Losing a child is an immeasurable loss, and this year we have lost too many young lives to traffic accidents. I want to start by expressing my gratitude to Councilmember Denise Lewis-George for her leadership and to the entire council for its role in introducing this bill to address this critical issue. I'm deeply appreciative that this bill treats all public schools, including charter schools, equally. As I testified recently, we really need effective DDOT planning that considers all the needs of our students and communities and finds solutions, from vehicle and pedestrian safety issues to a shortage of convenient bus routes and transportation options. The district's transportation needs are complex and compounding. Too often, the system is plagued by a lack of cross-agency coordination and long-range planning that does not center the needs of students, especially in communities with the most need, highest safety risk, and least infrastructure and opportunity. To that end, I'm encouraged by the more holistic approach to traffic safety concerns that this bill offers, including directing DDOT to conduct a thorough assessment of current infrastructure for every public school in the district, and then prioritizing school communities with the greatest needs. Other provisions, like standardizing school zones around every school, including charters, across the city, and providing every school with at least one crossing guard during drop-off and dismissal, will greatly improve traffic safety for our students. I want to offer a few suggestions for ways that this proposal could be further strengthened. First, while charter school leaders are in agreement that standardizing school zones and traffic calming strategies are necessary to keep students safe, the council should clarify how DDOT will seek input from the neighbors surrounding schools. New zoning ordinances and changes to traffic patterns will impact our neighborhoods, and they should be included in the process in meaningful ways. Residents know vital information that can help keep our neighborhoods safe, so we encourage the council to strengthen the bill by maximizing opportunities for residents' input and ensuring schools and neighbors are able to work together. Second, equity should always be at the center of everything we do, and that includes in our response to traffic safety issues. In some neighborhoods where our schools are located, particularly those in Wards 7 and 8, bus stops are up to a 20-minute walk from schools, and metro stops are mostly non-existent. Those routes are often unsafe for students to walk. That's why some of our school leaders have expressed concern about a provision in the bill asking for data collection on modes of transportation for the purpose of reducing reliance on cars. While we understand the intent behind reducing car use, we need to be careful that we aren't unintentionally dissuading a lot of our families from using the only transportation method that ensures their children arrive safely to school. Traffic safety is an equity issue, and for some families, encouraging greater use of public transportation versus taking students to and from school by car can literally be a life or death situation. I also want to encourage the council to think boldly about innovative solutions to equity and traffic safety, solutions that allow families to get students to school in ways that work best for them. For example, other states have implemented transportation modernization grant programs, which give schools the ability to try out innovative and unique solutions to their student transportation problems instead of imposing a one-size-fits-all approach. Third, while we understand the role that data collection plays in ensuring we are accurately identifying areas with the most need and effectively deploying resources, I encourage the council to consider better, more efficient ways to gather these data. Rather than surveying every student and staff in every school, the council should explore more efficient data collection methods, like setting a valid sample size, much like we've done with rapid COVID-19 testing information, that is representative of each ward, transportation methods, and times of day. These data are critical for long-range planning and for ensuring the safety of our students and residents. I encourage the council to direct DDOT and public schools to collaborate on better, more effective solutions for collecting them. As I've said before this council many times before, DC's public charter schools are nimble, responsive, and innovative. Each charter school has a different model to create unique and responsive learning environments for their students, so each one can choose a high-quality public school and receive a great public education that prepares them for lifelong success. We know that we all share the same goal, to build a truly equitable system that provides an education for all our students and does so safely. We at the DC Charter School Alliance are ready to work alongside the council and the city to ensure we are providing the education our students deserve. Thank you.
And thank you very much. Next is Brianna McGowan of Delicious Democracy.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Brianna McGowan. I also go by Bree. I'm a co-director of Delicious Democracy, which is DC's creative advocacy lab. I'm also an Edgewood resident, and I live along Rhode Island Avenue, Lincoln Road, and North Capitol. So I live at a pretty dangerous intersection, not only for pedestrians or bikers, but also for drivers. Almost daily, I see an accident along my block on Lincoln Road Northeast and Rhode Island Northeast. Last fall, I witnessed a biker get hit by a car crossing North Capitol. As I was biking home myself, and I stopped and waited with him until the ambulance showed up. Just last week, a student was hit by a driver. She was walking to school, and last year, a 5-year-old was killed on her bike in the crosswalk. There are about 5 DCPS schools where students have to cross these roads every day as drivers speed through our streets without regard for our lives so they can be the first at the next red light. But it would be remiss to only chalk it up to reckless driving when some of the underlying causes are the lack of enforcement, like you had mentioned, Councilmember Che, leadership at DDOT that is also disinterested in changing the status quo, missed opportunities to expand public transit, and also poorly designed infrastructure that incentivizes reckless behavior. My neighbor, Emily DeWolf, who also just spoke, recently held a neighborhood walkthrough with our DDOT rep to show the need and urgency for safer streets, and presented solutions to our DDOT rep that would significantly move our community towards having safer streets. More than 40 of our neighbors showed up and expressed deep concerns, but unlike some of my neighbors who have lived, here for many generations, I too have lost faith in DDOT, notoriously closing out requests of mine and other neighbors that don't get answered or addressed. And I can't help but think, is it because my zip code is 20002? Each time a request is closed, I have to make 3, 4, 5 more requests that span over months. For instance, I'm literally looking outside an illegally dumped mattress that was dumped in Rhode Island Avenue in the middle of this, huge arterial street. My partner brought the mattress on the sidewalk just seconds in time to prevent a crash as cars sped down the street. And I've had to make 4 requests to get that mattress picked up, and we'll be putting in my 5th request soon if the 4th fails. So needless to say, my neighbors and I are frustrated with the lack of consistency, transparency, and basic logic in requesting safety fixes from DDOT. And we, the residents and ANCs, have been and are following these processes correctly. I mean, we're doing the right thing. We're following DDOT's rules. And at this point, it's demoralizing to keep doing the right thing and just get radio silence. This process is clearly inequitable and unfair, and I cannot express enough how the Walk Without Worry Act would go a long, long way to restoring the trust and safety of my community, and knowing that my community safety matters to DDOT and to city officials. Like folks have said, 4 major things that I've heard that I also agree with: increase consistency to the process of safety requests, prioritize simple safety times for residential communities, reduce the time required to fix these for safety fixes, and review previously submitted and closed requests by following up with the requester to see if that request is still needed. Thank you for hearing my testimony, and thank you for proposing this act, which is a great start towards making the community safer and building trust with my community and other.
Thank you very much. Next is Dr. William Dietz of the Redstone Global Center for Prevention and Wellness at George Washington University. Dr. Dietz.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairperson Shea, Council members Nadeau, Lewis George, and members and staff of the committee. I'm Dr. Bill Dietz, Chair of the Redstone Global Center for Prevention and Wellness at the George Washington University School of Public Health. The views expressed in this testimony are my own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the university. The Redstone Center seeks to make the district the healthiest capital in the world by ending chronic health disparities and improving the health of all residents. We cannot achieve this objective without making climate change a central part of our public health strategy. Recognizing that climate change and health disparities often have common drivers, we prioritize double-duty solutions that address both planetary and human health. We support the Walk Without Worry Amendment Act of 2021 because improving pedestrian infrastructure will have benefits for both climate and health. Improved walkability will increase opportunities for physical activity, increase access to public transit, and reduce pedestrian injury and death, all of which will encourage increasingly active lifestyles among residents and simultaneously address climate change. In the first half of 2020, the district had 1.89 deaths per 100,000 residents, the second highest rate of pedestrian deaths in the country, and numerous injuries resulting from vehicle-related incidents. This legislation will make our existing infrastructure more resilient and safer for pedestrians by strengthening standards for continuous sidewalks, raised crosswalks, and raised intersections. Safety concerns often act as a barrier to walking and other forms of physical activity, and reduced physical activity leads to adverse health effects such as obesity, type 2 diabetes, and other health conditions. Approximately 80% of US adults and adolescents do not achieve the recommended levels of physical activity, and more than 1 in 4 district residents report no physical activity, a rate higher than the national average. Physical inactivity is a recognized risk factor for severe COVID-19 infections. Furthermore, the COVID-19 pandemic led to a 40% global reduction in physical activity. CDC's Guide for Community Preventive Services had recommended enhanced walking infrastructure as a policy approach to increase physical activity. Upstream approaches, like improved walking infrastructure, are more likely to address health disparities for socially and economically disadvantaged populations that face higher rates of chronic disease and lower physical activity levels. For example, diabetes prevalence is highest in Ward 7 and 8, with rates 3 times greater than other wards. Diabetes is a significant risk factor for heart disease, the #1 cause of death in DC. Rates of strokes are 2 to 4 times higher for adults with diabetes compared to those without. Inequities in these health outcomes are exacerbated by significant differences in rates of physical activity. 38% of adults in Ward 8 report physical inactivity, compared to just 6% in Ward 3. Equitable improvement in pedestrian infrastructure is a critical first step to reduce these disparities. Car use has been associated with decreased physical activity and increases in the prevalence of obesity and other chronic diseases. Walkable communities encourage residents to use active transport modes, such as walking, biking, and using public transit as alternatives to driving. Simultaneously, increasing active transport and reducing car use is a double-duty solution. It reduces greenhouse gas emissions and associated climate impacts and improves health. Because passenger vehicles account for nearly 20% of the district's greenhouse gas emissions, significant shifts to active transport are essential to achieve our goal of carbon neutrality by 2050. Increasing active transport can also reduce air pollution. Car exhaust leads to poor air quality and increased particulate matter pollutants, which are associated with pulmonary diseases such as asthma, as well as obesity in children and adults. Decreased air pollution will also reduce health disparities in Ward 7 and 8, which have the highest levels of air pollution from traffic congestion. Finally, in addition to its benefits for human health and the environment, increased walkability and increased access to public transit will improve social connectedness and benefit local businesses. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Our next witness is Commissioner Benjamin Bergman. Commissioner?
Sorry about that. Good afternoon, council members. I had a issue with my mouse. I don't know if it's for folks who have a Mac where you can't plug it in. I apologize. So good afternoon. I'll get to it. My name is Ben Bergman. I'm the chair of ANC 3D and also an ANC commissioner representing a single member district on New Mexico Avenue. I'll say up front, ANC 3D's Transportation Committee plans to discuss both these bills this month, and I anticipate that our commission will provide substantive feedback on areas we feel can be improved. As this committee knows well, our commission has been extremely supportive of efforts to improve safety on our roads, particularly installation of sidewalks and protected bike lanes connecting to schools, which is why I'm excited about these bills. And we also have a bunch of folks on our transportation committee, neighbors who volunteer their time, but also have a lot of expertise and are really in the weeds. And so I hope to send that along to you guys soon. But today I'm speaking just on my own as a dad of two small kids, age 5 and 2. And I think one of the things that I am concerned about as a dad is just the thing that a lot of folks have talked about today, the simple challenge of getting them to school safely each morning and each afternoon when they come home. So I want to thank the council for recognizing the need to improve pedestrian crossings in particular and to invest in traffic safety measures around school campuses. One of the things that I like most about these bills is the focus on design and also the recognition that we need to address safety issues at scale rather than one by one, intersection by intersection, debate after debate about whether there should be a crosswalk here or a sidewalk there. We need real standards, and those debates should be about exceptions to a rule that is a rule that's encouraging safety measures, not debates about whether we install safety measures. The other thing that I like about these bills is that standardization, I think, is a huge problem when you drive around the city from a driver's perspective. School zones look different when they're directly adjacent to each other. The signs are different, the safety features are different, and the result is that drivers are not accustomed to driving in a consistent manner through those school zones. And that leads to non-compliance with yielding at crosswalks. One of the things that I notice every day on my road is there's a lot of non-signalized crosswalks that families use to get across the street to go to school. And it's visually difficult for the cars to see them. And also the cars are not used to yielding to pedestrians. And that can create problems. The other thing, and I know I'm running out of time, that I think other folks have talked about is the need to address other facilities beyond public schools. In particular, I'm thinking about parks and recreation facilities, libraries, some of our private schools that are many in the area, and I know that aspects of them are addressed in the bill, but they are not subject to some of the same safety measures. And also college campuses and childcare facilities. I have a daughter who's turning 2 on Thursday, on St. Patrick's Day, and she is extremely independent, like her friends. She loves walking and running everywhere. The more stairs, the better. And each morning I see her toddling up to school with her friends at a daycare that's a block off a major avenue, and there's no signage, there are no safety measures in place, recognizing that although, yes, this is an apartment building and there is a daycare, but there's a daycare on the first floor, and there are kids going back and forth throughout the day. And I think that's a huge issue that we need to think about maybe in a separate bill, because the safety needs are different. The challenges are different. Think about a library where pedestrian traffic is different. It occurs at different times than at schools, when there might be other safety hazards to consider. And I'll conclude by just saying what I'm very encouraged by is that I think there's a recognition at the council that Vision Zero can't be a slogan. It can't just be a branding campaign, that we need to really change the infrastructure in our city, and we need to really invest in that in a holistic fashion if we hope to make progress. So I'll conclude, and I thank the council members for introducing the bill and all the members of the council that are supporting.
Thank you very much. And next is Garrett Hennigan of the Washington Area Bicyclist Association.
Wonderful. Well, good afternoon, Chairwoman Shea and members of the committee. Thank you for having me here. My name is Garrett Hennigan. I'm a Ward 5 resident, and I'm speaking today on behalf of the Washington Area Bicyclist Association, offering our enthusiastic support for both the Safe Routes to School and Walk Without Worry Amendment Acts. Last month, in recent testimony, I remarked that the Bowser administration and DDOT are not doing nearly enough to proactively and systematically redesign DC's streets for safety, while the agency is making dozens, if not hundreds, of street safety retrofits in projects big and small across the district. Most of them are reactionary responses to resident requests for traffic calming, speed bumps, and stop signs. Nearly all of those are modifications to DC's standard street design template, which always prioritizes the free movement of cars at speed. And those templates haven't changed quite a bit in many years. Shockingly, as others have mentioned, the Pave DC program, which repaves streets and rebuilds sidewalks in DC, we spend tens of millions of dollars each year to tear things up and put them back exactly how they were before, leaving the perfect opportunity to add bulb outs, raised crosswalks, and other pedestrian-focused design changes sitting on the table. It begs the question, are we doing this right? Unlike in the US, Vision Zero initiatives in other countries have actually been quite successful. And they are so because they completely embraced the notion of a safe systems approach to road safety. Instead of focusing on individual driver behaviors or individual pedestrian behaviors, wagging fingers at dangerous drivers and pleading for them to drive safely around vulnerable people, a safe systems approach starts with the assumption that people make bad decisions, that people make mistakes, and that humans, outside of cars especially, are inherently vulnerable. A safe systems approach proactively builds a road network that anticipates error and ensures that when people fail, that the consequences are minimal. This is why streets in so many European cities, for example, even those that are full of cars, feel so much different to walk around than ours. Slow, safe streets across the city and around our schools should not be an exception that only happens when community advocates, elected leaders, parents, students, victims, and survivors dedicate exhausting months of their lives to campaigns begging for small, safe street changes, and are only realized some of the time because they're against the rules. Safe, slow streets must be the default, built into the geometry and the design of every street and every retrofit. And with that in mind, the Safe Routes to School Act and Walk Without Worry Act are a major step to standardize some of the most effective tools to put them everywhere and prioritize them at schools. A few suggestions. With the Walk Without Worry bill, allowing written exceptions to raised crosswalks may seem reasonable, but a more prescriptive approach may be more effective at achieving results. A common reason given for why curb extensions, speed humps, and other effective pedestrian safety changes can't be installed is that they restrict turning movements for large vehicles or require significant changes to drainage inlets, which are expensive. That standard design may not work in every case, but I'm certain that creative engineers can make designs for many templates to fit a variety of the typical intersections that we have in DC that accommodate those larger vehicles, but still discourage high speeds for smaller vehicles. They may cost more or require more time, but it's absolutely worth it And that shouldn't be an excuse to leave those life-saving changes on the table. On prioritizing improvements for safe routes to school, a commitment to equitable investment requires investing more where the risk is greater. As we know, wards 7 and 8 have experienced a significantly greater share of fatal crashes in past years, and that greater context should figure into the prioritization of interventions. While data from the nearest quarter mile may be most immediately pertinent, a wider area would help capture that context. 2 more suggestions. Arterial streets are the high-speed corridors of our city, and they're consistently the high injury corridors of DC. So special attention and greater intervention should be prioritized when schools are adjacent to them. So traffic signals are helpful, but we're also recommending let's add in narrowing driving lanes, removing driving lanes, adding leading pedestrian intervals, dedicated left turn arrows, and protected bike infrastructure to be part of any of these interventions so that they're actually effective. Finally, safe routes to school for kids and staff requires a more thoughtful approach to the networks that make biking and walking to school convenient, not just immediately adjacent. The Move DC plan provides a broad network, but individual schools probably need a plan for how they connect into it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Next is Josh Rising, Ward 3 Bicycle Advocates.
Hello, thank you so much, Councilmember Che and other council members, for taking the time to hold this hearing and for putting these bills forward in the first place. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, the Ward 3 Bicycle Advocates seek to make it safer for people of all ages to bike around Ward 3. This includes people commuting downtown or out to other cities. This includes people biking around Ward 3 for fun, and of course, kids who want to bike to school. Recent events in Chevy Chase, DC, just a few blocks from where I live, show how much more we as a city have to do in order to make sure that our city is safe for people to walk, ride a bike, or even just sit outside to eat. I will take this opportunity, as I do in all public appearances, to remind everyone that currently Ward 3 has a grand total of 2 blocks of protected bike lanes, both of which were installed by a private entity. We must do better. Certainly, Councilmember Che, I'm aware of your support and look forward to, knock on wood, us having some vast improvements over the course of the next few years. I completely agree with the comments that have been made by Councilmember Che and others as to the need to really adopt a transformative approach as opposed to an incremental approach to address our needs in DC. I had a couple of personal anecdotes. We've heard a lot of personal anecdotes. We're all bought in for the need for some more safety. So I'm just going to skip to a couple of suggestions that I had for the bills. So one was trying to think through, as part of the Safer Routes to School bill, if there were ways to help push DDOT to be thinking about how to be creating safer routes for children who want to bike to school. The example in Ward 3 is Deal Middle School and Wilson High School, 2 of the largest schools in the city, but good luck biking there from Chevy Chase, DC, just a mile or 2 away. There's no safe route to do that at all. So one idea could be to require DDOT as part of the Safe Routes to School study that they have to do, could require them to put together a map for each of the schools showing their recommendations for how students in that school's catchment area should ride a bike to the school, and including as part of that, what % of that route includes protected bike infrastructure. Another part of another way to make it safer for kids to bike to school would be to explicitly prioritize in the legislation the installation of protected bike infrastructure over on-street car parking. I'm sure there's a number of other ways to get DDOT to keep thinking through how can we make it safer for kids to bike to school, but those were just a couple that came to me off the top of my head for the Safe Routes to School bill. One suggestion on the Walk Without Worry bill. So I think another area when I think of, for example, the new protected bike lane on Connecticut Avenue, what makes me worry the most are cars who are turning from Connecticut Avenue onto one of the side streets, who are not used to looking for bikes and may well be striking people who are in the bike lane. So one thing, I think that having the raised crosswalks next to bike lanes would be particularly helpful in making sure that the cars have slowed down as they're turning across bike lanes. So I would recommend that kind of the part of the bill that talks about standard, where raised crosswalks should be considered standard treatment, that be expanded to include when the crosswalks are next to existing protected bike lanes. So those are just a few thoughts as to how these great bills could be improved even more for biker safety and to help enable more children who want to be able to bike to school. Thanks again so much for your time and commitment to making Washington, D.C. a safer place for us all. Unfortunately, I need to go, so I can't stay around for the question period, but happy to follow up afterwards. Thank you so much, council members.
Thank you. Next is Kristen Scotchmer, the Executive Director of Mundo Verde Bilingual Public Charter School.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Che, Councilmember George, and Councilmember Nadeau. My name is Kristen Scotchmer. I'm the Executive Director of Mundo Verde Bilingual Public Charter School. I'm here to support this important legislation before you and to emphasize the importance of traffic calming measures near public schools and other places frequented by children. My school is an elementary school with 970 students in grades pre-K through 5th on 2 campuses located in Ward 5. We're among the most diverse schools in the district, particularly geographically, with students making their way to our campus from every ward. We are a school with a deep commitment to sustainability and have always encouraged our staff and students and their caregivers to walk or bike to school and to use public transportation. I'm excited to see this emphasis on increasing traffic calming. It's an important step to increase safety of our schools. And I say this as a leader of a school with some advantages. My school team is committed to student safety and collaboration with our neighbors. We dedicate over 30 staff daily to reduce the impact of our arrival and dismissal and to keep our students safe. We benefit from having bus routes nearby. We have, as you heard earlier today, the consistent presence of a crossing guard posted daily at a busy intersection near campus, and yet it really isn't enough. A few examples of how this has affected our community. Staff, students, and caregivers that ride the Red Line Metro must cross 3 major streets, New York Avenue, Florida Avenue, and North Capitol Street to get to our Cook campus. These streets have as many as 4 lanes of traffic, and the lights are timed to ease traffic moving in and out of the city, not to support pedestrians going east or west. We've repeatedly asked for support from crossing these streets, but have been told that the intersections are too dangerous for a crossing guard. We've made requests regarding traffic calming measures on P Street and other parts of our neighborhoods, and we've been working with agencies to get support in implementing them. Despite significant time taken to meet and responses from agencies, we have not yet seen actual measures implemented. Finally, there are many times of day when neighborhoods benefit from traffic calming. Our campuses have small footprints. Our students are regularly in the neighborhood, not just at arrival and dismissal, but throughout the day to make their way to neighborhood playgrounds. We believe this is a valuable use of citywide resources to support students in schools, but it means that our students are on the street and crossing streets at all times of day. Our students are also out and about with their families at other times of day, including the weekends. Last fall, as you've heard already today, a Mundo Verde student was hit in a crosswalk and died as a result of her injuries. Children should be safe while in a crosswalk, whether on their way to school or making their way around neighborhoods at different times of day. So some concrete things that I think help. First of all, the legislation is incredible, and I urge you to support and pass the legislation. And I'm grateful for the support of the 3 of you with this legislation. I wonder about the following ideas: establishing clear, consistent expectations for all schools and school zones, supports for schools interested in being part of the solution. I heard Shannon advocate for this earlier today. We have had a bus, but it has proven extraordinarily expensive. It helps us get students from one part of the city to another when they're moving in the same direction, but we have subsidized it entirely ourselves. I urge you to simplify the process for schools requesting calming measures. and a clear, transparent way for them to understand where the measure is in the queue. I heard earlier today the idea of including schools in citywide planning for traffic calming measures, not just once at the time of construction, but on an ongoing basis. And I encourage you to do that. Our specific example on Cook campus, we met with DDOT when we did our construction as we were moving into the Cook campus building, but we haven't had an ongoing relationship. And we know now much better than we did 7 years ago what that was going to look like. Finally, including not only pedestrian counts, but also traffic counts to determine priority for calming measures, and including not just schools in this legislation, but other areas frequented by children and seniors. And again, not just at arrival and dismissal, but throughout different times of the day. I really appreciate your important critical work on this effort, and I'm available to answer questions as you see relevant. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is Bailey Voigt, public witness.
Hello. How are you doing today?
Hello.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you, Mrs. Che, and all the council members here today for being a part of this hearing. My name is Bailey Vogt. I am a video producer in the area. I'm a carless Ward 1 resident in Parkview, and DC's driving is so bad I've been radicalized into a walkability advocate. I live off Georgia Avenue, and I have been flipped off, spit at, even called a faggot for the horrible crime of using the crosswalk. That's the cost of the right-of-way. At one point, a retirement home bus driver yelled at me for being on the bike in the right-hand lane, blocking his ability to make a right on red. He called me an idiot. He inched the bus 6 inches away from me, all to shave off like a few seconds. This is shown at schools too. I don't have kids, but when I was at City Paper, I was reporting on the new traffic calming measures instituted by Bowser and DDOT at Bruce Monroe. And I witnessed a woman, while school was letting out and children were crossing this street, lean on the horn because she was blocked by parents picking up their kids, yelling profanity, and then reversing into a spot and backing into the car behind her. And this is all as if to drive the point home. These bills are welcomed and appreciative, but as Council Chair Che has pointed out, it's not enough. DDOT's solution is to look both ways, but just this weekend, 2 people were killed in a Chevy Chase restaurant's sidewalk seating. What were they supposed to do, look both ways before ordering their sandwich? One thing that needs to change is we have to slow people down unconsciously, not consciously. The American Psychological Association reports that drivers will determine their speed by the obstacles in their surrounding. More obstacles, less speeding. This is why streets like Georgia, Connecticut, and Mississippi have such rampant issues. With long sight lines and wide roads, drivers treat them like highways. A great example of how to calm a street is actually 17th Street Northwest. I remember before the pandemic, it was a 3-lane speeding nightmare. Now there's only 1 lane of traffic that made room for bike lanes, parking, and streeteries. The street is built for people, not cars. It's not perfect, but often on a bike, I will go faster than the cars, which I think we can all agree is better than the other way around. Narrowing the streets leads to safer streets. Of all the negatives the pandemic brought, one positive is DC rethinking how it's now using its road space. It's time to try new things, not just put patches. Let's find places like Adams Morgan's 18th Street to turn into a walkable plaza. Make room, just take cars out of the equation in general. Let's invest in public transport to give people more choices than driving. So then they turn around, so then they take more cars off the road, leading to safer streets. Let's pressure DDOT to actually invest in following through with punishment for reckless driving. This goes beyond looking both ways. It's about looking at things differently. Got it all in.
Nicely done. Thank you very much. Next is Lyle Blanchard, public witness.
Good afternoon, Councilmember Che, Councilmember Nadeau, and Councilmember George and other members of the Transportation Committee. My name is Lyle Blanchard. I'm appearing today as a private citizen for a couple reasons. One is I am concerned about traffic safety in DC. Years ago, I worked for former Councilmember Jim Nathanson. And I was his staff person on the Transportation Planning Board issues for the Washington Metropolitan Council of Governments, and also an ANC commissioner in ANC 3C. And I recall a long time ago when the main road between Reno Road between the National Cathedral and the Maryland border was up for some changes. It used to be 2 lanes in each direction, and that was a little bit too exciting for daily traffic. And so making that, reconfiguring Reno Road into a 3-lane arterial with the middle turning lane has slowed down traffic considerably. Now I live over in Councilmember George's ward, but just beyond Broad Branch. And I woke up one morning and heard this banging and beeping, and speed hump signs were erected right in front of my house. And that led to an exciting 3 weeks of trying to figure out what was going on, because, I want to wish everybody a happy Americans with Disabilities Month. I have a disability. I have replacement hips. I need to get knee surgery. I was hit by a car a long time ago. That's not the reason I have replacement hips, but I have experienced firsthand as a 7-year-old getting hit by a car while trying to cross a major street. And so I know personally what it's like, even though my wife and I don't have children. I support both bills, but I ask for a little bit more due process and a little bit more collaboration with neighbors on the street where traffic calming is going to